Okay, we're gonna get started. Thanks for being here in great numbers. I'll give this to you when I'm done. So our guest today is Dr. Sara Burch. She's the associate professor of biology at SUNY Geneseo, right down the road or up the road, depending on north of here. Dr. Burch has a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from University of Chicago, and master's, I believe, and PhD from Stony Brook in anatomical sciences from Stony Brook University. She's been at Geneseo since 2015. This is all good accomplishment, but buried down in her CV, there's a line that caught my attention. In 2011, she was consultant for a company that made toy dinosaurs. Hold on. The collection she worked on became, according to Wikipedia, quote, the world's premier line of scale model dinosaur figures. So we're very honored to have you here. So here we go. And for life,
all right, hopefully that'll work out there. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. We'll actually get to see some of the, I'll try to remember to point out one of the dinosaurs that was the basis for the some of the model stuff and like where that came from, why I ended up doing that. What I do is I study forelimb function in predatory dinosaurs. And so, I'm going to kind of tell you about my work, why I look at this stuff, and how. Oops. There we go. Okay, so first off, what am I talking about here? I have predatory dinosaurs in the title, but really this is a group of dinosaurs known as theropods, and they're mostly predatory. There are a few that eat plants, but they started out predatory, and they all started out kind of looking like this, where they have relatively long arms. They run around on two legs, so they're bipedal, and that means that their arms are not used for locomotion. And that's kind of important for kind of understanding what they were doing with these arms and how they worked out. So theropods started out, like I said, something kind of like this. This is the Triassic period when they first evolved. And you see there's someone running around on four legs there. That's not actually a dinosaur, even though it looks like one. It's just a closely related guy. But the other guys in the back are the ones that we're going to be looking at. So from this kind of long, thin forelimb, theropods really went nuts. They started doing a lot of different things with their forelimbs. Some of them got really long, some of them got really giant claws, and some of them got really, really short. And most of it, you're probably familiar with the idea of Tyrannosaurus rex and its tiny little forelimbs. And that is one of the things I study. So I study forelimb function, but specifically I tend to study forelimb reduction. So why we have these dinosaurs with these tiny little arms. What were they doing with them? Why did they evolve that way? So like I said, part of this has to do with the fact that theropods are bipedal. So they run around on two legs. There are not a lot of animals today that run around on two legs. The majority are quadrupedal. And most of them still tend to use their forelimbs for other things that aren't that are still related to locomotion. So like kangaroos still walk around on their forelimbs, and birds are the bipedal descendants of dinosaurs. And of course they are flying with their forelimbs, except for the flightless ones like that ostrich there. And all of this really just kind of means that it's hard to figure out what dinosaurs were doing with their forelimbs in this bipedal, because we don't have a lot of good modern models. Most of them are still kind of not using their forelimbs for the kind of thing that we think maybe predatory dinosaurs were using. So the question becomes kind of like, what do they do with them? They've gone all over the place. They've done all these different things as far as shapes and sizes. For a lot of them, we kind of assume that they're predatory because they have these big claws. They are predatory. So they're using them for predation, for capture, prey capture. But the other thing that theropods did with their forelimbs, and I kind of alluded to this, is that they evolved them into wings. And it's not just birds that have wings. Lots of non-bird theropod dinosaurs have wings. And so they were using them to fly or potentially balance or displays and things like that. But we still don't know a lot about what they were doing. We have just a lot of ideas. So first, I'm going to talk to you about how we study this. How do we go from a bunch of bones to behavior? And then I'm going to talk about the previous research I've done and some of my ongoing research in this field. All right, so there are a couple of ways that we can study the forelimb function. One of the ways that I have studied this in the past is looking at the evolution of size and shape. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of these different types of studies. This one is kind of a statistical modeling type approach, things like that. Another thing that we can do is what's called myological reconstruction. So we take modern animals and we use them to figure out what the musculature, because of course, what moves the bones, it's muscles. And so we need to know what the muscles look like, but the muscles don't fossilize. So that's another aspect of it. And then we can put all this stuff together and we do this 3D musculoskeletal modeling to help hopefully try to tell us what was capable, what these animals were doing. Like I said, I'm particularly interested in when these forelimbs get really small. So for instance, in this, what you're seeing here is the red clades here, the red groups of dinosaurs are the ones where the forelimbs have gotten really tiny. And there's this idea that in these groups of dinosaurs, there's this evolutionary trajectory toward forelimb reduction and loss. Basically, we're getting small, we're getting useless. And so I wanted to know, do these trends exist? The blue up there, that is on the line to birds. And here, actually, we see the opposite. We see elongation of the forelimbs. So the question is, kind of, do these trends really exist? Do they make up the whole clade? What's going on in the middle here? So in order to do this kind of size evolution stuff, I took a lot of linear metrics of forelimb length to kind of determine what was going on here. Are these things, do we see reduction? Do we see convergence across these disparately related theropod species? So one of the things that I did is this kind of modeling setup where you take this tree, this phylogenetic tree relationship of all of the dinosaurs in question here, and use what's called Ornstein-Uhlenbeck stabilizing selection model. So this asks, are we seeing convergence in these groups of theropods that have these small arms? And so we look at all this stuff. So what are we actually looking at here? So these guys here, down here, that's a group called Ceratosaurs. And Ceratosaurs, this dinosaur that you're seeing right here, that is the one that was used as the basis for that toy. And one of the things that they wanted me to, tell them about is what the forelimb of this thing would have actually looked like, because previously, the previous models just kind of threw something on there. We had a kind of a rough idea, but based on some other similarly closely related dinosaurs, I was able to give them a better forelimb for this dinosaur. And so that's this little tiny part, because it is very tiny. That was my contribution to the toy. All right, so that's a Carnotaurus there, and you can't even really hardly see his forelimb on this slide so tiny. We'll see them a little closer up later. Tyrannosaurs, the famous ones, of course, with tiny forelimbs. And we also see convergence in this group here. This is a weird little group of very small theropods. So these are like kind of maybe turkey sized. But they have these little tiny forelimbs with big claws on them. And then we think they might be using them for opening up ant mounds and termite mounds. They think they're dinosaurian anteaters. So we have this convergence in these three clades where we see similar proportions going on. You can see a bunch of little red lines going on here in our bird line dinosaurs. This is kind of, it's not very clear here. So there's not one big trend that is over all of birds. But I don't do a lot with birds, so that's just kind of like a little add-on there. Bird evolution is complex. All right, so then the question is if they're converging in size, are they converging in function? Probably not, is the kind of idea here. Each of these dinosaurs have very differently shaped forelimbs, and that's kind of the next part of this, is looking at the shape of the forelimbs. So we can use something called geometric morphometrics, which takes an outline of the bone and turns it into a way that we can kind of quantify that shape. And so I had a student at Geneseo who did all of this work looking at the shape of this, in this case, the humerus, which is the upper arm bone here. What you can do is you can kind of group these using these geometric morphometric analyses by you get this kind of plot that shows you this morphospace. So over here on the far, I guess, right or left side of the screen for you guys, we have all these dinosaurs with long, thin forelimbs. And so that's like this ornithomimosaur here. Over on this side, we have all the ones with shorter, really robust forelimbs. Although not all of them are super short, they're just very chunky. And what's interesting is what you're seeing here with the kind of the circles here represent a bunch of these different groups here. And among tyrannosaurs, which are ones, of course, that we're interested in, we see a pretty wide spread. So some tyrannosaurs have what we call gracile, these long, thin forelimbs, and some of them have really chunky forelimbs. Now, the interesting thing about this plot and the way that the forelimb shape is plotted on this principal components analysis is that it very closely matches the way that that humerus shape is plotted when we look at a completely different group of animals. You probably would not guess to think of kind of right off the bat, and that's cats. So cats are kind of interesting, and so they are, of course, everyone knows cats run around on 4 legs, but cats also are one of the few animals that actually uses their forelimbs in predation. So cats range from large prey specialists who grapple with their prey, like this lion, as they're taking it down. And that might be a pretty good model for what some theropod dinosaurs were doing with their forelimbs. It might be the only real model we have that's living today. And then we have small prey specialists, and these cats don't really grapple with their prey. They like bat it, out of the air or out of the water or something like that. They're evolved for very quick movements versus very powerful movements. So that's our kind of gracile to robust scale. So quick versus powerful. And like I said, the way we look at our cat forelimb matches very closely what we see with our theropod forelimb in this kind of morphometric. And here are functional categories. The circles that you see are actually large prey specialists over here in red, and small prey specialists over there in blue, and then our kind of mixed prey guys in green kind of not surprisingly spreading out over a lot of space. So then the question becomes, is this a decent metric for prey specialization? Are we looking at small prey specialists over on this side of the tree? Are we looking at large prey specialists over on this side of the tree? And are we seeing a range in our tyrannosaurs as far as the type of prey that they might be able to use in their forelimbs? So this is kind of really interesting and suggestive, but it doesn't quite take us there. We can't really tell if it's possible that these dinosaurs were using their forelimbs like this. And that's where our next real phase comes in here. And that's the myology. So that's the muscles. And so what we do, and so I told you, the muscles don't fossilize. Soft tissues don't fossilize. So we don't really know for sure what the muscles of these dinosaurs look like. So what we do is we use modern animals to get a better sense of that. And in this case, the modern animals are what we use are what we call an extant bracket. That means we're taking the most closely related animals that are living today, and we are we're asking kind of what do their muscles look like, and can we that tell us about dinosaur muscles? And in this case, the most closely related animals are birds and crocodiles. These are on the two sides of our bracket. And then lizards and turtles are kind of floating out there, kind of as a little base thing so we can understand how the muscle evolution has occurred. So we use these trees and the modern muscles to tell us all about where these muscles might attach, and we can make these things like these muscle maps where we're looking at where the actual attachment points. So what you're looking at in these red and blue spots are basically areas where the muscle attaches to the bone, and that's determined based on the congruence of these different attachment sites in modern birds and crocodiles. And it turns out it's not, they're pretty decently congruent despite the fact they're using their forelimbs for very, very different things. So we take that and we can turn it into something like this. All right. And so that is kind of thinking about muscles in a more three-dimensional context, which I'll get back to a little bit later. So one of the things that's really important about muscles and why we want to figure out all of these attachment sites is that you can tell a lot about what an animal was doing with their forelimb by looking at what are called muscle moment arms. So this is kind of like physics thing here, a little light physics for your geology seminar, but this is just basic mechanics. The longer your lever arm on a muscle, the further away it is from the joint, the more power, the more force you're going to get out of that system. But the shorter the lever arm and the closer it is to the joint, you get faster and a larger range of motion. So kind of you can either be built for speed or for power. So more power down here, but you can't have both. This is a trade-off that you have to make when you're building muscular systems. And so we see it in this kind of you can see the difference of the heel bone of the cheetah versus the lion. The lion is built for kind of not long, really extended or fast running. It's built for quick, powerful leaps and things like that, versus a cheetah is going very fast, going for long distances. It's built differently. So we're going to come back to these moment arms and stuff in a little bit. So one of the things that I've been doing is doing a lot of these muscle maps for a lot of these theropod dinosaurs. So reconstructing these muscles in a lot of different theropods, and two of the ones that are really interesting, of course, Tyrannosaurus rex over there. You see right up there, and then Majungasaurus, Crenitissimus. So Majungasaurus is one of these ceratosaurs, kind of like the Carnotaurus that I told you about was the toy. This is what the forelimb actually looks like. Yeah, it's really that weird. That is a whole forelimb. You see the little hand there at the end. It almost looks like it's kind of stuck onto the humerus directly, but there's a whole forelimb there. I promise. It's just very, very strange. So we can look at all these different muscle maps, and they can help us kind of understand how the musculature has changed. So in the middle there, you have Allosaurus. This is a longer, you can tell, more well-developed forelimb. This is one that people generally accept probably had some role in predation. And so if we look at how the muscles differ in each of these species, then we can kind of understand a little bit better about what is going on and what they were possible with, and what kind of what our evolutionary trajectory is. So one of the first things that we can kind of tell when we start looking at muscle maps and the morphology is this question of use or not, right? So this is a big thing. A lot of people assume that just because the forelimb is small, it means it's not being used for anything. And this is not an unreasonable assumption when you're dealing with dinosaurs that are that big and they have forelimbs that are that small. Then it can be hard to think of what they could possibly be using them for. But just assuming that they're being not used is not the way to go about it. We want to know, are they being used or not? And one of the things we can do is ask, all right, well, what does it look like when we have animals that aren't using their limbs for something? And that's where things like flightless birds will come in. And we can do things like compare the morphology of a kiwi, which is not using its forelimb for anything at all. They just hang there. They don't do anything. There's no reports of them using them whatsoever. Versus an ostrich. So ostriches are flightless. We know they're big. They're not running around. They're not using their forelimbs for flight anymore, but they do still use them. They use them to shade their nests. They use them for display. You might have kind of seen a video or something of an ostrich doing a dance. And they also use them for balance during running and things like that. And so then the question is like, can we say anything about that? And this is actually a part of my research that is very kind of early stages. I have just starting to get students working on this question of how much we can tell from modern birds about were they using their forelimbs or not, and kind of can we apply that to our dinosaurs. But the initial thing is that generally when you reduce your forelimb so that you're not using it for anything, you tend to just kind of just make it really small and simple. You can see, especially in the kiwi, those bones don't look like they have anything going on. They're just these little sticks. Versus in our Majungasaurus, which is this, which is on the far left there. Like I said, that's a really weird forelimb, right? You can see there's a whole little hand there at the bottom. What's really wild is it's got this ball and socket humeral joint. That means that it's kind of really, really very, very, very mobile. And so when I kind of published this Majungasaurus muscle reconstruction, one of the things that I suggested that could be a possible use for a limb that's this small, it's not grabbing anything with that tiny hand, but if it's got a really, really mobile shoulder, maybe it's using it for some kind of display. And I'm not sure if any of you have seen the show Prehistoric Planet, but you may be familiar with this scene. So they actually, this was just like last year, a couple years ago, maybe, came out with this scene where they have the Carnotaurus here, and you can see him. They decided he would have a little blue under of his arm, and then he would use it for display. So The toy thing is really cool, but this is actually my research in in a prehistoric planet as well, which was really awesome to see show up, and it means I can put this in my slides too. So that's he's moving that little forelimb around, maybe something like that. There's other kind of weird things that go on with really, really tiny limbs. What you see over there on the left are the hind limbs of a snake. How many of you knew that some snakes have hind limbs? Probably not many, right? They have these little tiny limbs in the back. Boas and pythons do only, and they are used during mating. And they have these like tiny little claws. They're actually not used to hold on. They're just used to kind of stimulate the female at exactly the right frequency, and then then they can mate. And so they're still being used. They're still retained. This is a forelimb that's got something going on. So looking at Tyrannosaurus is kind of a bigger and more controversial question, because Tyrannosaurus is, of course, everyone likes to have an opinion on Tyrannosaurus and what it was or was not doing. By far the most popular opinion on Tyrannosaurus is that it was not doing anything at all with its forelimbs. But there have been other hypotheses put forth. Some, at least, so a couple of people thought that maybe it was doing like a little push-up to help itself get off the ground when it had laid down. Maybe they're using it during partner clasping during mating, so they kind of use it to hold on to the female. Or and then some people have actually kind of put forth this holding on to struggling prey. Kind of once you get it close enough to your chest, you could kind of hook on and see where it goes. Now, like I said, we can look at the myology, the muscles of these dinosaurs, and figure out what they were and were not capable of. And so even I'll tell you a little bit about a kind of a bigger, this 3D modeling that is ongoing now. But for right now, even just looking at the very simple maps of the muscles, we can ask, okay, are these muscles well set up for the forces that are kind of involved here? So on the left, you have like a model of holding on to, say, struggling prey, trying to get away from you, or maybe a female also during mating. And so it's going to pull that forelimb forward. And so we can ask, does it have enough force behind the kind of to pull backwards at the shoulder, to hold the elbow keep it from getting straightened out and things like that. We can also ask on the right, now this is our push-up, right? The push-up hypothesis. Do we have enough force to generate a push-up? Are the muscles set up that way? And I can tell you right now, just from these little diagrams, that the push-up is not very well supported. So the muscles related to that they would need for this are not they're actually kind of smaller than you would expect, right? From given the size and everything like that. Whereas our other muscles relating potentially to holding on to prey are bigger than you would expect, which is really kind of interesting. And related to those moment arms and stuff like that, we can calculate something called mechanical advantage, which tells us how much, what kind of leverage the animals are going to have using certain muscles. And we can look at how that evolves over our evolutionary history of Tyrannosaurus. So at the bottom, you have Tyrannosaurus. This is kind of our smallest forelimb. And then the longer forelimbs are kind of toward the top of these two trees. And you can see that we're going from like blue to yellow. And that is showing an increase in mechanical advantage in these two muscles. That means that these two muscles are stronger in Tyrannosaurus than they are in Tyrannosaurus's longer armed relatives, right? So for whatever Tyrannosaurus was doing with its forelimb, it was probably using these two muscles. These are just two as a kind of an example, one at the shoulder and one at the elbow. That kind of shows some support for some of these kind of interesting side note possibilities. The last guy I want to talk about here is our little Alvarsaurids. These are the little dinosaurian anteaters. This is a guy named Mononicus from Mongolia. You can see that's his forelimb up there. It got a big old claw on the end of this, and a reasonably decent sized, but it's only one claw, and they have only one single digit, just one giant claw. But they have all of these big, you can see hopefully the big kind of lever sticking out past the elbow, right? So that's going to greatly increase the mechanical advantage and the moment arm of this animal. And it turns out not too dissimilar from what we see in animals that are digging. And so this is a pangolin that uses its forelimbs to tear open termite mounds and rotting logs and things like that to get insects. And it's got a lot of the same features. It's got these big claws. It's got the really giant process coming out the back of the elbow. And so there's a lot of things that do suggest that these guys were actually using their tiny, tiny little forelimbs in a situation like that. And so I had a student a couple years, like a year ago now, who was working on the forelimb musculature of this animal. And so hopefully we'll kind of know more about what was and wasn't possible in this dinosaur soon. Okay. Last thing I want to do is finish up with talking about this 3D musculoskeletal modeling. So this is kind of the next big chapter, and it's where we go from, we have the muscles, we know there's probably something going on, but how can we go from a muscle map to a 3D model where we can actually test different scenarios? So I'm looking at Tyrannosaur forelimbs. Of course, we have Tyrannosaurus rex here, and we have one of Tyrannosaurus rex's very early relatives. This is one of the first Tyrannosaurs ever, a dinosaur called Guanlong. And Guanlong has relatively long, slender forelimbs that are also, Guanlong's much smaller than T-Rex. So we look at their forelimbs. So these are not to scale. Guanlong is it would be very, very tiny if it was to scale. But we can look at kind of, you can see there's some drastic changes that have undergone during the evolution of these limbs. And so that will, if we kind of look at how the muscles have changed, maybe we get a sense of how these have evolved. All right, so how do we go from here to here? Oops, sorry. We do a lot of this kind of modeling in 3 dimensions. We have to define, you can't just put it together. We have to articulate our skeleton in 3 dimensions. We have to put all our muscles in, define how and where our joints can rotate and things like that. This is kind of what these things look like at the very beginning stages. First, we kind of have to set out, here's our limb. We have to put these, you see the coordinate systems, these kind of 3 little XYZ arrows, and these are kind of showing this is the directions that the joints can move. We can take that and turn it, and we can add all the muscles to it, like so. Sometimes the muscles, the software doesn't actually know where the bones are, so we actually have to tell it to wrap around the bones so it doesn't go through the bones, like so. And then we end up with a model that looks something like this, and we can take it through different movements, like so. I'll give it a second to turn here, and so you can see we can look at the different movement at all these different joints. You kind of see how the forelimb moved. And one of the things that we're doing with this is actually we get a bunch of things that look like this. This are all of our moment arms. So this is harkening back to thinking about the lion versus the cheetah and things like that. We can look at which muscles have the best moment arms, are strongest in different directions and things like that. So there's a lot of craziness going on, but I want to kind of focus in on one particular type of thing going on here. So this is all our muscles that are going to be kind of used for pulling backward. So if you think about pulling backward at the shoulder, that's like pulling backward on prey or something like that. And one of the things this can tell us is that so the lower they are, the kind of the higher or the more negative, the better their moment arm is. And it turns out a lot of them have better moment arms when, if we're looking at like down the barrel of this theropod, when the forelimbs are kind of out like this, they're raised up. So this suggests that maybe this dinosaur was actually using its forelimbs to in position habitually to reach out like this versus reaching out like this. All right, so we can tell maybe something about the posture of this dinosaur. We can compare dinosaurs to other dinosaurs and find out kind of, do they have greater or lower moment arms? And this is something that I'm going to be doing with our Tyrannosaurus rex as well. I don't have a current model of our Tyrannosaurus rex, but it is actually currently under work by another new student that I just got this semester. And so he's got all the wrapping surfaces in now too and stuff like that. So we're definitely getting close on understanding more about our Tyrannosaur model as well. All right, so I'm going to wrap up with that and leave some time for questions. So I have a lot of collaborators and great students at Geneseo to thank, and I would thank you for listening. Be happy to take your questions. Yeah.
So, you saying that there was no fine motor movement in the fingers, or you just not know?
So for a lot of dinosaurs, it kind of depends. So some of them certainly would have had, they have kind of these long, thin fingers, probably a decent amount of fine motor movement. When you're dealing with something like Tyrannosaurus, you're probably looking at less they only have 2 fingers to begin with. So they're probably not doing a lot independent of each other. They're probably working as a unit. If you're dealing with something like that Majungasaurus or a Carnotaurus, where that hand have really, really short hand, those fingers were possibly barely visible from the outside. Like they're kind of almost like a mitt at the end, because they're so short. They're barely longer than the metacarpals. So. Yeah. What's my favorite dinosaur? Usually I say Majungasaurus. Majungasaurus was a dinosaur I started working with very early on in grad school, and I spent a lot of time with Majungasaurus, including a lot of time in the field. Majungasaurus is from Madagascar, and I've done a whole bunch of field work in Madagascar to dig up Majungasaurus bones, including a bunch of the bones I worked on. So, yeah. Yeah, so when I came to grad school, I kind of didn't have a set path, but I had worked on Theropod forelimb function as an undergraduate research project at just Chicago. And so when I was kind of thinking about possible dissertations and things like that, I was like, well, there's a lot that we don't know about Theropod forelimb function. And so that could be an interesting way to go. And then my advisor, who was kind of involved with or running the whole Madagascar project, was like, well, we have this crate. They had just in a previous field season, like couple years before, found a whole complete hand of this dinosaur, which had never existed before, a whole complete arm, I should say, the whole thing, which is the thing that was illustrated up there. And it was like, well, you know, you could look at this, what is this forelimb doing? And so that kind of sparked off this focus on forelimb reduction. So it's a little bit of both. Yeah.
Certain types of forearm.
Yeah. So the short answer is no. So tyrannosaurs are what we call Laurasian, so they're on the northern continents, and they kind of own the really tiny forelimbs in that particular area. Alvarezsaurs, the dinosaurian anteaters, are mostly found in like China, Mongolia, Asia, but there are some actually that have popped up kind of scattered around. They're just not super common. But all of those abelisaurs like Majungasaurus and Carnotaurus are from southern land masses. So they're from Gondwana. So they're showing the kind of forelimb reduction in that particular area. So it's kind of like all over the place ultimately. And we don't see kind of in one area or the other kind of longer or shorter. It's kind of a mix. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the dating, I mean, it depends a lot on the location. In some of these places, the dating is pretty tight because of kind of volcanic ash beds and stuff that they can date in the strata. Like for Majungasaurus, I don't remember what the date is off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure like the Maberon Formation in Madagascar is pretty tightly dated. It's right at very end of the Maastrichtian Cretaceous. And so, but yeah, it's just kind of, it depends a little bit on where you're going. Because sometimes you find and there's, the dating is much fuzzier. So. Not off the top of my head. I'm not really, that's not really my kind of, I don't really do with the dating and the geology side of things. It's more of the biology stuff. So it was over here. Good question. Yeah. You know, you think about a lot about the muscles and kind of what you're doing with them and things like that. I'm also not helped by the fact that I teach human anatomy. So I have a very different relationship with my body than I think a lot of people. But yeah, you definitely start thinking a lot more about kind of about this muscle movements and what's possible and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So for the stuff at the beginning where it's all of the muscle, that was actually a lot of that data was collected during my dissertation, and it was actually a whole bunch of caliper measurements. I went all over the world to different museums to collect things, and the Morphometrics is based on photos. The later stuff with the 3D modeling, those are all 3D scans, either laser scans or CT scans. And fortunately, this is becoming more and more common to scan your animals and more accessible, where some of these scans are kind of being fortunately publicly shared and stuff like that. And I'm going to be doing a lot of modeling also. We're doing some modeling of some of the modern flightless birds too. And so there's 3D museum scans from different natural history museums that are being used in those as well. And fortunately, yeah, you get a good scan, it's like almost like having the bone right in front of you. So yeah.
So in water,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of when you're thinking about function in the forelimbs, or in any limb, you're kind of looking at this trade-off between speed and force. And so when you're kind of thinking about some of these dinosaurs like Guanlong, which is the really long forelimbs and stuff like that, this is a dinosaur that was probably built for speed as far as the forelimbs go. I mean, even the hind limbs, it's a pretty long-limbed animal. And so that can tell us a lot about what Guanlong was probably doing with its forelimbs, that it's not necessarily grappling with prey on a situation like that, but more of kind of like quick movements to grab at things and stuff like that. So, and it's the speed force ratio comes into really big, it's really important for things like locomotion with the hind limbs and stuff too. So yeah. Sure.
And these students you're using for research, you're able to work with your scholarly publications?
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't had anything coming out yet, but actually two of them, Allie and the student who is working on the Tyrannosaur now, are definitely going to be on this Tyrannosaur paper. I've also had students working on kind of unrelated to this stuff, but like some fossils from Madagascar. They're going to be on the papers as well, and they're all undergrads. Geneseo doesn't have a grad program, so thanks.